The night before my wedding, my dad pulled me aside. Not to hug me, not to say he was proud. He looked me dead in the eyes and said, "Don't embarrass us tomorrow. You've already done enough of that in your life." I smiled, I nodded, and I said, "Don't worry, Dad. Tomorrow is going to be a day you never forget." He thought that was a compliment. It wasn't, because what he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had spent the last 14 months quietly, legally, and very deliberately dismantling every single thing my family thought they owned. The business, the property, the reputation, all of it. They spent 26 years telling me I was nothing. They found out at my wedding exactly how wrong they were. If you've ever been told you'd never be enough by the people who were supposed to love you most, stay with me, because this one's for you. Drop a scissor in the comments if you've ever had to cut someone off to save yourself. Subscribe the channel and please like that video for me. Let's go. My name is Renee. I'm 27 years old. I own a marketing firm, a condo in Austin, and a life that is so far removed from where I came from that sometimes I have to remind myself it's real. But let me take you back to the house I grew up in, a 4-bedroom colonial in a quiet suburb outside of Columbus, Ohio, where everything looked perfect from the outside and was absolutely rotting on the inside. My father, Gerald, was the kind of man who believed his word was law. Not because he'd earned it, but because no one had ever made him pay a consequence for anything in his life. He was charming to strangers, ruthless to family, and he had one golden rule: Marcus could do no wrong. Marcus is my older brother, 2 years older, 6 inches taller, and the single most spoiled human being I have ever encountered in my life. And I say that having worked in marketing, where narcissism is practically a job requirement. From the time I was old enough to notice, the difference in how we were treated was not subtle. It was not occasional. It was structural. It was baked into every single day of our childhood like it was just the natural order of things. Marcus broke a neighbor's car window with a baseball. Dad paid for it and laughed it off as boys being boys. I came home 15 minutes past curfew at 16. I was grounded for a month and had my college savings account, my account, money I'd earned babysitting, frozen as a lesson in responsibility. I stopped having friends over by the time I was 13. Not because I was antisocial, but because I was ashamed. Ashamed of how my dad spoke to me in front of people. How he'd correct me mid-sentence, roll his eyes at my opinions, and then turn around and ask Marcus what he thought, nodding like my brother was some kind of oracle. My mom, Patricia, God, where do I even start with her? She wasn't cruel the way my dad was cruel. She was worse. She was passive. She watched everything. She saw every slight, every dismissal, every moment my father made me feel like I was an inconvenience in my own home. And she smiled her small, careful smile and said nothing, because saying something would have cost her something. And Patricia did not spend what she didn't have to. I worked harder than any kid I knew growing up. Not to impress them, I gave up on that around age 10. I worked hard because I understood, somewhere deep in my gut, that I was not going to be rescued. No one in that house was going to hand me anything. So I built it myself. I graduated top 10% of my class, got a partial scholarship to Ohio State, worked 2 jobs my first 2 years to cover the gap, because when I'd asked my dad to help with tuition, just once, one conversation, he'd looked at me with this expression, this tired, dismissive look, and said, "Renee, let's be honest with each other. You're not really the type who's going to set the world on fire. Maybe look into a trade." Marcus, by the way, had his entire 4 years at a private university paid for. Every semester. Without question. I didn't cry that night. I was past crying. I went back to my room, opened my laptop, and applied for 3 more scholarships. I got 2 of them. Fast forward to age 24. I'd graduated, built a small client roster doing freelance brand strategy, and had just landed my first real anchor client, a mid-size e-commerce brand that needed a full marketing overhaul. It was the break I'd been grinding toward for 2 years. I made the mistake, the last mistake I would ever make with my family, of sharing that news at Sunday dinner. My dad put down his fork, looked at Marcus, then looked back at me with that smile, that tight, humoring smile, and said, "Marketing? So basically, you make pretty pictures and hope people buy things?" Marcus laughed. My mom refilled her wine glass, and I sat there with the news of the best thing that had ever happened to me dissolving in my chest like it was nothing. That was the last Sunday dinner I attended for over a year, and it was the night I started planning. Here's the thing about people who underestimate you for your entire life. They get comfortable with it. They stop watching you. They stop paying attention. Because in their mind, you're already categorized, already filed away, under not a threat. And that is the single greatest tactical advantage you will ever have. I spent the next 14 months being very, very quiet. Not sad quiet, not defeated quiet, predator quiet. The first thing I did was hire an accountant. Not just any accountant, a forensic one. Because about 8 months before that last Sunday dinner, I'd started noticing something. Small things. Paperwork my grandmother, my dad's mother, Nana Dot, had mentioned casually during phone calls. References to a property she owned in her name, a small commercial lot on the edge of Columbus that she'd purchased back in the 1980s and had been quietly leasing to a local business for decades. Nana Dot was 81, sharp as a tack, and she loved me in that unconditional way that grandmothers sometimes love the grandchild that everyone else overlooks. She used to say, "Renee, you're the only one in this family who ever actually listened to me." She wasn't wrong. And about 2 years before all of this, she had told me something over the phone that I'd filed away in the back of my mind without fully understanding its weight yet. She said, "Baby, I changed my will. Your father doesn't know it yet, but I left that property to you. You're the only one who will do something real with it." I had cried, thanked her. And honestly, I'd half forgotten about it until my forensic accountant started digging and found something that made my blood go from warm to ice cold in about 30 seconds. The property had been transferred. 8 months prior, quietly, through a power of attorney document that my father had apparently had Nana Dot sign during a period when she'd been hospitalized for a minor procedure, groggy, medicated, and alone, because I lived 3 hours away and didn't know he was there. He had transferred her property, my inheritance, into a holding LLC, his LLC, and then he had begun the process of selling it to a developer for $340,000. The closing date was 6 weeks away. I want you to understand what I felt in that moment. It wasn't anger. I was beyond anger. Anger is loud and messy, and it makes you sloppy. What I felt was something quieter and much more dangerous. It was clarity. I called a real estate attorney that same afternoon. Then an elder law attorney. Then I drove to see Nana Dot myself, sat with her at her kitchen table with a cup of tea, and very gently walked her through what I'd found. I watched her face go from confused to hurt to something I'd never seen on her before. Furious. "He told me it was just paperwork to protect the property," she said. "He said it was a formality." She signed a revocation of the power of attorney that same week. My attorney filed to contest the transfer on the grounds of undue influence and elder financial abuse. We had documentation. We had her hospital records from the day she signed. We had the timeline. And we had Nana Dot herself, who was sharp, credible, and angry. My father didn't know any of this was happening. because I told no one, not a single person in that family. I went completely dark, politely declining dinners, sending birthday texts, acting like a mildly distant daughter who was just busy with work. Meanwhile, the case moved through the courts with a speed that still surprises me. My attorneys were good. The evidence was clean. And elder financial abuse cases, when documented properly, do not tend to go well for the perpetrator. The property transfer was reversed 4 months later. My father was formally reprimanded. There were financial penalties. His name was now attached to a public court filing, describing him as having exploited an elderly person's diminished capacity for personal financial gain. Let that sit for a second. And then, I got engaged. My fiancé Daniel had been with me through all of it. He knew everything. He was the one who held me on the nights when the legal process felt slow, and I was scared it wouldn't work. He was steady and calm, and when I told him what I wanted to do at the wedding, he didn't even blink. He just said, "Tell me what you need." Here is what I decided. I invited my entire family. Both sides. My parents, Marcus, my aunts and uncles, family friends who had watched me grow up. About 60 people who had, at various points, witnessed my father diminish me and said absolutely nothing. I invited them all. I seated them in the front rows. I let my mother cry happy tears during the ceremony. I let my father sit there in his good suit, looking like the proud patriarch he believed himself to be. And then came the reception. We did toasts after dinner. Daniel's best man went first, beautiful speech. My maid of honor went second, funny, warm, perfect. And then I stood up. I thanked our guests for coming. I talked about Daniel and meant every word. And then I said I wanted to share something, because this day felt like the right moment to close a chapter and open a new one. I told the room, calmly, clearly, with a smile on my face, that 6 months ago, my father had been found by a court of law to have financially exploited my grandmother by manipulating her into signing over property she had intended to leave to me. I told them the case had been resolved. I told them I had the property. And I told them that I wanted everyone in that room to know, because I was done protecting people who had never once protected me. My father stood up, started to say something. I looked at him and said, very quietly, "Sit down, Dad." "I'm not done." He sat down. I looked at my mother and said I hoped she found the courage someday to speak up for the people she claimed to love. I looked at Marcus and said nothing, just held his gaze for 3 full seconds and looked away, which honestly was worse. And then I raised my glass to my husband, to Nana Dot, who was seated at our sweetheart table, in a purple dress, beaming, and to every single person in my life who had ever believed in me when my own family didn't. My father left before the cake was cut. My mother followed him. I danced all night. 3 months later, I leased the commercial property to a local women's business collective at a below-market rate, because I could, and because I wanted to. My father has not spoken to me since the wedding. Neither has Marcus. My mother sends occasional texts that I read and do not answer. Nana Dot calls me every Sunday. My dad once told me I'd never amount to anything. And honestly, he was right about one thing. I never amounted to anything he expected. I became something he never saw coming, and I would not change a single second of it. If this story hit you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you're in a family that takes from you instead of building you up, remember, the best revenge is a life they can't touch. I'll see you in the next one.